Okay.
Hi, everybody. Trenton Bennett here, audiobook narrator, and I'm here with author Robert G. Williscroft. And he and I are working on a series of books. So today, what I wanted to share with you is how we do the audiobook prep for different titles. So what Robert and I are going to do today is have some fun working through our pronunciation, because the second Oort Chronicle has a number of words. Some of them are alien, some of them are just unusual. And if we make sure that I'm going to say them correct the first time around, then we save ourselves a whole lot of trouble. Hi, Robert. Thanks for joining us.
I'm happy to be here.
Robert is the author of the Star Child trilogy and the Mac McDowell missions and the Oort Chronicles, which just began with Icicle, a Tensor Matrix. So we're working on the sequel to Icicle. And what we'll do at the end is we'll talk a little bit about what's coming up in that sequel as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. And what I want to do is I want to run down a list. When you're an audiobook narrator, you have to read every audiobook at least twice. The first time you go through the book, you check it for any speed bumps, place names or phrases or bits in foreign languages that you need to make sure you know how to pronounce before you step in front of the mic. And that's what I've done here is I've made a list. Then you get to read it twice, because the second time through, you actually go through and pay attention to the plot and get to really enjoy the story and dive into the characters. And then, of course, you do your third read, which is you in front of the mic doing the recording. So I'm going to go ahead and go down the list. And the first one, Robert, is for the alien race, the Asterians?
Asterians, that is correct. Asterians.
All right, off to a good start. All right, so Asterians, and then one of the aliens is named Adrun Glowalorn?
Adarin.
Adarin.
Adarin Glowlorn.
Adarin Glowalorn.
And since I'm the author, I can make the pronunciation any way I want it.
Exactly. So I'm getting this straight from the proverbial horse's mouth. All right, so that brings us to Frolic.
Frolic is the first inhabited planet in the Asterian system, and you pronounced it correctly. Frolic.
Awesome. All right, we're doing good. And then we have our bad guy, Isidor Orlov.
Beautiful.
Cool. And that brings us to more of our aliens, like Mason Arca.
Mason Arca, correct.
Awesome. And Bardan Talok.
Bardan Talok.
Bardan Talok. Okay. Bexel Carok.
Correct.
Cool. Botex Ravnan.
Ravnan.
Botex Ravnan.
Correct.
All right. And here's a little unusual one. Divra Okai.
Got it.
Cool. Divra Okai. Okay, so we talk about a cryptocurrency that the Phoenix Company puts together, and the first time it appears in the book, it appears with the symbol Phi. Do you want me to say when it's first introduced, Phoenixes, Phi, and then move on through the text, or just say Phoenixes and keep reading?
Phoenixes.
Okie doke, will do.
We don't need to talk about phi, because that's simply when a person looks at it, like with a dollar sign, you look at it and you say dollars. When you look at the phi in my universe here, you say phoenixes.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you. So now we get into acronyms, because we know any organization loves its acronyms. And in this case, the Oort Federation Space Force. Should I say that? That's for people tuning in and watching this. It's spelled F-E-S-F-O. So should I say that FESFO?
Make the S a little bit sharper. FESFO.
FESFO. All right.
And
a little fussy like FESFO.
Military people always do that. They find a way to take a long name and make it sound short.
FESFO, you got it. And this is one where I'm not as familiar with the nuances of Russian pronunciation for things like, we have a Sergei who is Sergyi, in the Mac McDowell series. And then we have a Sergei, Sergii.
Sergei.
Sergei. So Sergei Anatoly Borisovich?
You got it.
Sweet. Now I know. And that brings us to some more interesting names like Holon Mavic.
Holon Mavic, correct.
Cool. This one's going to be fun. Prozel Squazon.
You got it. Yeah, that we played around with that one to get the proper pronunciation, but Prozel Squazon.
Perfect. Glad to hear it.
Just for your listeners' sake, he is the one guy who escaped the invasion from the first Oort Chronicle, and he's on his way back home.
Oh, yeah. He's the one ship that's going to take a long time to get there because he doesn't have some of the technology that our heroes have.
Correct.
But I'm not going to give any spoilers. So then we have Zantag Gloalorn.
Zantog.
Zantog. Like Guten Tag. Zantog Gloalorn. Cool. And then the character Zhang Yupei.
Works.
Cool.
Yep.
Roald Stefansson.
Exactly.
Cool. Sometimes I trip on the Nordic ones, so. Roald Stefansson. Got it. And then we have a Russian word that's Germantitov, but if I'm speaking a Westerner's voice, like a general American accent, it's spelled Gherman, so should I have them try to just say Germantitov?
No, let's say German.
German. Sorry, say again?
German Titov.
German Titov. Will do. Many thanks to Google Translate for helping me actually have the Russian pronunciation of that word. And that brings us to Arokov.
That is pronounced correctly. That's an Indian word, by the way.
That is a cool detail in the story. Yeah. Do you want to tell them a little bit, since that's not really a spoiler, about how that name came around?
The NASA had sent an exploratory spaceship out into the Kuiper Belt, just looking to see what it could find. And one of the things that is spotted was a rather large object that they gave one of these peculiar names that NASA always gives to everything that I do not remember. But it turns out that the Goddard Space Center and the another analysis unit in the general vicinity did all of the work on it. And there's a long-standing Indian tribe there who had become interested in what was going on. And so the scientists at the Goddard Space Center gave the council for this Indian tribe the task of coming up with a name for this object. And they came up with Arokov, and the meaning of the word and some of the details are in the book. But it's an appropriate name, and it shows up several times in the story. And it shows up in the sequel as well.
I really did enjoy that little bit of trivia. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's a cool little extra. I don't know. I really love hard SF, but I also love the fact that there's a lot of actual history and science fact behind it all.
Yep.
Cool. So I have a couple words that I've done in the first book, so I'm going to skip those because we got the pronunciations down pat. But I will, there's a unit of length, Debye? Dubai. Okay, that's easier. Dubai.
What I had to do was go to a couple of people who actually use that unit of measurement in their work. And when I pronounced it much like you did, they said, "What?" And then when I described it, they said, "Oh, Dubai."
Dubai. Cool. And on a side note, that's also a funny note that I think everybody's going to get, which is every time in this book that I say GIGA in relation to electricity, I am not going to pronounce it like Doc Brown and say 1.21 gigawatts. It's gigawatts. 1.21 gigawatts. Come on, Doc Brown, get it right. Okay, so this one, I'm pretty sure this is a French word, but it has to do with an inertial mass reduction device. And is it pronounced pays?
Pays, that's it.
Cool, because if I were actually speaking French, I wouldn't pronounce the S, but a general American is going to say pays. All right, so that brings us to a combination. I think it may be Rogan.
Yes, Rogan.
And then Roganians?
Right. Rogan is the second inhabited planet in the Asterian system, and Roganians are people who live on Rogan, like Mason Arca.
Okay, perfect. And then we have a city, and I believe we've used this actually before in the Star Child trilogy, maybe? Nanity Vallis. So I think we'll be okay. I have reference files for it.
Naneti. Naneti. Right. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. Some of these others will be easier to tell without the list, because when I try to say them, you'll immediately go, wow, that sounds like a train wreck of syllables. But first, one of the easier ones is Broeck. And is that pronounced Breck?
Bruck.
Bruck.
Sort of between O and E. Bruck.
Bruck.
Like an umlauted O in German.
Got it. I'm going to make a note of that real quick. Umlauted O. Got it. We get, yeah?
I think he went through life upset because despite his fame at coming up with the concept, nobody pronounced his name right.
And I think that's kind of relatable, because when we did the Mac McDowell missions, and I looked up how to pronounce the names of some of these extremely remote places in the Arctic, there were some areas where no one really speaks them out loud that I could know of. So we had to do a little extra digging to find the names of some of these tiny islands and things that were, I think, originally named by Nordic folk.
Either Nordic folk or the Inuit who live up there.
Right. Yes, we had some Inuit words too. Which, by the way, that series is tremendous fun. Anybody who wants a military adventure similar to Tom Clancy's stuff, set in the 80s and involving submarines, you will not be disappointed. There was a lot of really great things, not only in the story and the adventure, but lots of science and biology about the Arctic Circle that just fascinated the heck out of me.
By the way, recently a Navy admiral was sitting in the audience as we were discussing the three books. And he commented that he says that Robert Williscroft is a damn fine writer who's been there and done that.
I say that to people all the time, too. It's not a lot of people, I guess, who aren't already familiar with your books would know that you've had a very adventurous life and absolutely earned the distinction of being in the Adventurers Club in Los Angeles. You know, I think you may be the only person I will ever meet who has been to both poles.
Well, there are a few of us around.
That's just amazing to me. I'm living in Florida, so it's everything that the North Pole and the South Pole are not.
And we don't want them to become that, because then Florida won't be there anymore.
Exactly. Please know, I mean, I can swim, but I don't think my insurance covers floods where I am. Okay, I've got some more fun ones that are really going to be obviously complicated. So here we go. Zubinul Janubi.
That's pretty good. There are several pronunciations of it. One is actually splits it into two words, but I've preferred Zubinul Janubi. Yeah, I like that pronunciation best. It's Arab, you know, Arabic. It was the Arabs first discovered this group of stars.
Oh, cool! I didn't realize that. I wondered where that came from. Cool. So Zubin al-Janubi.
Right.
And that leads me to another one. Here we go. I'm gonna stare at it and concentrate here. Zubin Shmali.
Yes, you got it.
Awesome. Those were the biggies. I'm like, oh, there is no way I'm gonna blindly give that a
This
try.
morning in the shower, I was for some reason, something, you know how something will catch your mind and you'll have a word go. It was Zubin al-Janubi was going around in my mind just this morning in the shower.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, because that one's definitely fun to say once you get the hang of it. It's supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, but more celestial.
Yeah. When Johnny Oort brings it up in the second Oort Chronicle, he actually does it in a way that he puts his foot in his mouth. And he backsteps away from it and ends up with a comment something like, well, just saying.
Yeah, I remember that. Yes. That was kind of fun. And I'd like to take a moment and mention that I really found it delightful. This is not a spoiler, but the little nod to the movie Total Recall with Johnny Oort was kind of fun. I think everybody who's seen that film really enjoyed it. Very topical, given it was kind of about ancient aliens and terraforming Mars also in one go. Very cool. Okay, we're in the home stretch. I don't have many more for you, but I really appreciate your time doing this. Let's see, I have App Talk.
Correct.
Cool, App Talk. And then Tojek?
Yes.
Cool, you never know. That could be a silent J or sound like a Y. Difecta?
Correct. And just Difecta is a moon of the largest gas giant in the Asterian system.
Cool. So that, I'm looking over here. I have a few more. These are places on planets, and I just want to double check my pronunciation. And then there's Damvet?
Damvet.
Damvet.
Damvet is the space station, the large space station around Rogan. It's orbiting Rogan. It's actually occupying the L1 position between Rogan's moon and the planet Rogan itself.
Okay, cool. So I've got that. And then Sisyphi Planum.
Yep.
Cool. Sisyphi Planum, then Adiabatic.
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 That refers to winds that are pressure driven down off of mountains. Adiabatic winds.
Spoken like someone with a NOAA level of expertise. Adiabatic. All right.
I do have a degree in meteorology, so.
I would love to be able to use that in a sentence. I'm going to come up with a reason to say that the next time it gets windy around here.
I wonder if these winds are adiabatic or just pressure cell driven.
There we go.
You have any mountains around there?
No.
No. Well, then adiabatic's kind of hard to do.
And let's see, regolith.
Regolith, correct.
Cool.
That's basically the stuff that makes up the surface of Mars.
Kind of loose rocks?
Mostly, yes.
Okay, and then Argyre planitia.
Yes.
Australia. Nope, let me try that again. Australe Lingula?
Australe Lingula.
Australe Lingula. All right. I think it's going to get easier now because Hellas planitia.
You got it?
Isidis planitia.
Isidis.
Isidis. Okay, Isidis. And now, this is the one where I go two different directions on. Chrissy Planitius.
What other direction would you take it?
Chrysi
Okay.
or Chryse?
Which do you like best?
That's a good question.
Europeans pronounce it Chrysi planitia. Americans pronounce it Chrissy planitia. Let's go the European route.
I have a feeling that Chrysi would be a little bit closer. What do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah.
I'll make a note of it, though. Maybe if I have an American saying it, they'll say Chrissy, and then if it's a non-American, they'll say Chrysi. We can do that kind of nuance. We have the technology. It's called a notepad. All right.
I have one of those on my computer.
Ah, me too. It's like a pro tip. I'm actually using my notepad now for all of these. Which reminds me, we've actually reached the end of my list except for the words and phrases in Russian that I'm going to use Google Translate for. And some of them are bad words, so I'm going to save us from having to be explicit. And I'll just learn how to say those bad words in Russian so that they can be appropriately surprised, shocked, or angry when the characters speak.
Yeah, I had the option. I know that you enjoyed the writings of Robert Heinlein. Robert Heinlein was he was fastidious about his language, but he for the whole first series of his books, written mostly for young adults, kept the language such that parents wouldn't object. And then in his later books, he decided to drop that aside. So, in the spirit of Robert Heinlein, my characters talk like real people.
It's very believable because as I was going through both of these chronicles, while on the one hand, the first book definitely has a lot of cyberpunk overtones, as does the second, I also kept thinking of the later works, like The Cat Who Walks Through Walls. Some of the stuff that happens in this book reminds me of the way events unfold in The Number of the Beast, where you have characters that they make discoveries, then they put together a plan, and they put it in motion. And there's not a lot of drama in between. The drama is about the bigger picture events of what is the consequence of this thing.
Yeah, it's I can't argue with that.
And anybody who is a Heinlein fan will immediately recognize the instant nod to The Cat Who Walks Through Walls. So that said, if you've got a couple minutes, let's take a moment and let's tell folks a little bit about the Oort Chronicles. I'll briefly start off by mentioning that while the core concept of Icicle at the very beginning of that book is simply that a person, Braxton Thorpe, who is dying, has his head frozen, but that head is then able to be scanned and mapped and uploaded into a matrix. And that already starts your cyberpunk premise that's pretty cool. And he becomes a kind of a digital being, if you will. But everything that unfolds from there just gets so huge, so large scale. It makes it a really good read, and without giving a spoiler, it's a little reminiscent of William Gibson's Mona Lisa Overdrive as things get bigger.
Yeah, you think Elon Musk when you think of Braxton Thorpe, a very wealthy engineer who has a vast and exciting imagination. But yeah, he gets things going in Icicle and discovers that there is an existential threat, a real existential threat, not a made up one, to humanity. And he also discovers the Oort, a distributed intelligence that resides in the Oort cloud, which we see behind you in the image there.
Yes. For those of you who don't know, the background here is the cover of the first book.
Between Braxton Thorpe and the people who work with him and the Oort, they managed to come up with a way of dealing with the inevitability of this invasion. And in the process, they discover interesting things about physics and about spaceflight, about wormholes, and basically change the entire direction that the human race is going because of a few simple but very meaningful discoveries, kind of like the wheel, kind of like electricity, but in a more advanced scenario. And the second book picks up where the first book leaves off. And I'm not going to give away a spoiler here, but things are not as they seem to be. And it takes a while for the major players to discover that maybe they better re-examine everything they've been through, because it might not be as they think it was.
And that is, I will take a moment and say, that is one of the trademarks of some of the later Heinlein books, is that if there was a criticism, sometimes events would just kind of flow along. Until there was a conflict, everything was kind of taken as given. And this is a different situation where they're going, wait a minute, it seems like everything's good, but it looks like we actually may have a problem and we need to dig deeper.
And thrown into this whole mix is a Russian oligarch who is making his mark in the solar system. I guess you could call him a solar system oligarch at this point. He has no allegiance to Mother Russia. He has an allegiance only to himself. And he is developing with his scientific team systems that parallel the systems that Thorpe and his people are developing. But scientific developments don't always follow each other in exact parallel. And so there are divergences, and these divergences become important. There is an ultimate showdown in the Asterian star system. I'm not going to say whom the showdown is between, but it involves humans, several groups of humans. It involves the Oort. It involves the people from Frolic, and it involves the people from Rogan. And that leads to a climax and an interesting push forward with hints of what might be coming.
And I will say that you made the point earlier that Braxton Thorpe is kind of like an Elon Musk who gets to leap ahead a little bit into the near future. And at the same time, you mentioned that some of the discoveries are really as big as the wheel. And I mention this because my wife and I have been discussing the book because she loves to go backwards with anthropology and look to prehistory and early humanity. And I thought it would be worth the point that the human mind has so much potential and so much high intelligence that there's a twofold piece here. Number one is, it's fascinating to me to imagine that a mind like Elon Musk's, moved 50 years into the future or 70 years into the future, is the kind of person who, because their mind is unique at analyzing and coming up with things, they would adapt very well and have a lot to say to people that are that far advanced. And so as we go backwards and we look at human prehistory, sometimes there's a little bit of a fallacy among folks to think, well, the early folks, they didn't know all that much. Well, as we were talking about it, we thought about how if you had to survive every day by knowing exactly what's going on in the world around you, you did actually have to be very intelligent to be able to come up with your very own homebrewed ways of not just the wheel, but understanding the weather and the seasons and stockpiling your food and protecting yourself. That's a lot for the human mind to cognitively process, and even folks who might have come from an ancient time, despite the lack of understanding of how perhaps an iPhone would work, would still probably do pretty well at being able to process information, I think.
I completely agree with that. There's a delightful story that I read. It comes from back, I think, in the 1950s. It takes place in a university tavern. The Shakespeare professor is sitting at a table nursing a beer, and three physics professors are up at the bar talking about their latest experimentation and how they've developed a time machine. The Shakespeare professor is sitting there listening to this, half listening, half not. And these guys are saying about how, they wanted to bring somebody forward from the past. And they wondered, maybe we got to bring somebody who can handle the present. And so they brought Leonardo da Vinci into the present. But poor fella, he couldn't handle it, and they had to send him back. And then they brought Newton. They figured, well, Newton might be able to handle it, but they had to send him back too. And then they got to thinking, wait a second, we're focusing too much on science. Who is the one guy who seemed to grasp all of it? Well, everybody knows that's Shakespeare. At this point, the professor's ears perk up, right? And they brought Shakespeare forward, and the professor jumps up and runs to the bar and says, "You mean you guys brought Shakespeare and you didn't even introduce him to me?" And they looked at him and they said, "Sorry, Prof. We put him in your Shakespeare class and you flunked him."
Oh, I love it. I love that kind of twist at the end.
Let me tell you just a little bit about some things that have been happening in the real world. The Star Child trilogy, I talk a little bit, my characters look into the past to some work that NASA was doing in our time. And they talk about a guy named Harold Sonny White, who is a maverick scientist who's been working for NASA for 20, 25 years. And they discuss some of his work with wormholes and with Casimir fields. Now, what I did in looking at current research, I discovered Sonny White and the work he was doing, and I knew where his work had to be going. It was obvious from his reports and his research papers. And so I just built this into the story. Well, 2 months ago, guess what Sonny White created? The very first artificially created wormhole, exactly as I predicted it in the Adiabatic Federation.
Oh, wow. That is awesome. That's amazing. I had not heard that.
So I will be going out to my email list here in a day or so, describing it and just giving them a little sense of, hey, this is cool stuff. In the Adiabatic Federation, I have a postdoc down in the bowels of the research institute working away, and he gets some measurements and he says, hey, this can't be, this is impossible. So he starts over from the beginning and does the whole thing again, exactly the same results. And he's pretty excited. He brings them up to his chief scientist, which of course would be Sonny White, except different names, right? And this then develops into their wormhole technology and their warp drive technology.
I remember that. And I remember once that hit in the Star Child trilogy, things really went crazy in the sense of it was such a big dramatic change. Yeah. It was like if the entire planet in the Stone Age had been given the wheel overnight and immediately understood how to use it. I mean, it was just huge.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to write about and hugely exciting to see the development actually take place. There's another development that is much more ephemeral, much more esoteric. But scientists using spaceborne telescopes have stumbled across an area of the universe that's very, very far away. It is an area that is absolutely empty. There's nothing. There's no dust. There's no stars. There's no galaxies. There's no nothing. And an analysis of what they're looking at leads them to believe that this is an area where our entire universe, not our galaxy, not our local group of galaxies, but our entire universe is intersecting with another entire universe in this meta universe that we think we live in. And in the third Oort Chronicle, guess where my guys are going?
That's going to be cool because I don't want to give any spoilers, but of course, when you think about the rest of the solar system and beyond, you start talking about other places to go. So yeah, that's pretty amazing to think of because it reminds me of when I first had to get my head around dark matter. I was reading a Larry Niven story and it was really complex, but I thought about how it's something that kind of can be measured and yet can't be perceived, if I remember that correctly. And this sounds a little bit like that, a little bit like how when Einstein was describing wormholes that, 2 points in space that are completely unrelated from our perception are able to...
they're actually congruent. They are the same point from another perspective. It's just if you can set yourself outside of it, and that's how these our universe and this other universe are being mentally envisioned by the men and women working on it. they picture this meta universe that is multi-dimensional. They argue between whether it has 7 or 21 dimensions. I won't get into that.
It is really heady stuff. And I got to say, anybody who loves science, especially astronomy, should check out the second book when it comes out. I'm really excited about the sequel. So maybe when we get a little closer to the audiobook getting released, I'd love to get back together with you and do a little interview about the stories, because some of the things you're talking about with fact as well as science fiction, I actually made a list of all of the things I noticed in there that fascinated me that were either current, had been predicted and still have a potential, or were really game-changing like nanotechnology.
Yeah, how did you like the nanocosm?
That was amazing. That was one of those moments. In fact, that's the reason I thought of it. Is I think 1993, I read Neil Stephenson's The Diamond Age, which was all about a cyberpunk-styled society that had nanotech as a ubiquitous function of everything. And this nanocosm was a massive extension of that. I mean, it's like the Oort cloud itself. It was something we can barely understand now, writ large to the point of ubiquity. And that was amazing.
You know, when I started focusing in on science and technology, we used dividers, we used pens and pencils, we used special paper, and we did drawings on them, and we used calipers. And then the whole electronic age of drafting came along, and AutoCAD became the thing that one used. And instead of doing all of these really intricate things on paper, you would define for AutoCAD what it is you wanted, and AutoCAD would draw it for you and put in the dimensions, and then you'd give the specifications and so on. We'll just carry that two or three levels further on to where you have this device and you tell it, I want to build a vehicle for transporting people. It's going to have 4 wheels. It's going to be driven by some type of electricity rather than an internal combustion engine. You lay out in English or whatever language you speak, whatever the details are, and then it goes to work. And a short time later, it presents you with the complete plans for the latest Cadillac.
Basically, machine learning being able to extrapolate a proper model based on simple inputs.
But what the nanocosm does, in effect, is listens to you, creates a design, you verify the design, and it goes one step further, and it goes out and it finds the raw materials, and it uses nanobots, and it builds it.
Amazing. I really feel like if we were to get to that Star Trek point of transporter technology and matter replication, this would be that first step along the way.
I think we're much more likely to reach wormhole before we reach teleportation.
We'll start easy. Instead of saying Cadillac CTSV, we'll just say T. L. Gray hot. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and wrap us up for now. I would love to get together with you again when we get closer to release. But Robert, thank you very much for your time. And I will go ahead and stop recording here, and we'll put this out on YouTube and share with folks.